Hi, my name is Madison Moser. I go by Maddie, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And this is my cultural identity digital storyboard for SOW 5132, diverse client populations. To start off, who am I? Well, as you know, my name and my pronouns, but some other identifying factors about me are my age. I am 25. I am part of the millennial generation or Generation Z, depending on which resource you consult. I was born in 1996, which is right on the border of both of those generations. So I do identify with both, depending on the situation. I am a cisgender female, and I am white. And I identify as bisexual. This is actually a newer revelation for me. And though I have invited in most people in my life to that knowledge, there are still a few people who do not know this about me. And I used to be a Christian. I actually even went to a Christian college for undergrad. I identify now as an ex-evangelical, which is the new phrase for ex-evangelical Christians, though I am still spiritual in my own way. And I am now financially independent of my parents, but I did grow up in the upper class, so that had defining factors on my upbringing. Some other things about me: I wear certain labels outside of just those factors like my age and gender. I am a daughter, sister, girlfriend, student, barista, essential worker the last few months, feminist, leftist, college graduate, a colleague. I'm privileged. But more than anything, I am a human being. And especially looking at diverse populations over these last several weeks in this course, I have come to realize that we are all human, and that is something that identifies all of us. And though that's extremely basic, it is a fundamental truth. A social justice issue that I am really passionate about is the Me Too movement. This was a phrase coined by Tarana Burke in 2006. She was a survivor of sexual violence and created this movement with the purpose of helping other women and girls of color have a place to talk about their experience, to work through it, and to find resources. This was then made really popular in 2017 by a viral hashtag on Twitter. This was after the accusations of sexual assault and harassment against Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood. I believe Alyssa Milano was the first person to use this hashtag in 2017 in light of this case. And there is a lot of intersectionality when it comes to sexual violence. So first, intersectionality is that crossroads of the different identifying factors that make up a person. We have multiple layers to our social identity: our gender, race, religion, age, ability status, different things like that. And so having more than one of those creates intersectionality. So as you can see listed here, there are certain women who are more vulnerable to sexual violence in their lifetime: women of color, non-able-bodied women, queer women, women who are immigrants or non-US citizens. And so that is where this intersectionality kind of plays in with this movement, in that there are certain women who have a statistical likelihood to experience this at a greater rate, which is extremely devastating. However, I did want to point out that every demographic experiences sexual violence in some way. And the Me Too movement, though it was initially founded for women, has expanded, and they're reaching out to all survivors regardless of gender, and especially young boys who are victims of sexual violence. That is something that is not always talked about, and something that does need to be made less taboo to talk about and to get help for. So that is something that the Me Too movement is working on, though it was initially founded for women and girls. But privilege and power do play into this movement just like they do any other movement. First, with power, sexual violence is an assertion of power over the victim. So in an example where a woman is the victim or the survivor of sexual violence, it is a sexist power over that woman in the act of sexual violence. And that can happen with age as well, whether it's an adult violating a minor. And so there is a power imbalance when sexual violence occurs. And privilege has also played a part in this movement, specifically with white women taking over this narrative. As I mentioned earlier, Tarana Burke founded this for women of color, for girls of color, and white women took over the narrative in light of the Harvey Weinstein accusations. And though it is completely valid for any woman, regardless of color, to speak her truth, and any man for that matter as well, it is a whitewashing of this movement, which was specifically in defense of Black survivors. And so that has been something that has occurred and is changing the movement. But now that people are becoming more aware of that, it is part of Me Too and other organizations such as Time's Up to really amplify Black voices and make sure that their stories are told, that they get the resources they need as well. And I think part of why, and by I think, I mean, this is from an article in Medium, which is cited later in the presentation, but a reason why several voices that were white were favored was because of this focus on the workplace, which was Hollywood and the Harvey Weinstein case. And so it was a lot of white actresses that, like I said, should absolutely come forward and tell their story. That is completely valid. But then that gave way for more white women to speak up and to actually speak over the Black voices that were speaking of their trauma as well. So that is a way that privilege has influenced this movement. But it is a wonderful thing that we are becoming aware of that. And as a white woman, it is always good for me to check myself when I am raising concern, to make sure that I'm not speaking over voices of color or voices that do not have the same privileges as I do, whether that be in age or ability. And so those are just things that I keep in mind with movements such as this. And then this comes back to and relates to cultural competence. So this is from our text by Sue, Rashid, and Rashid. What is cultural competence? Paraphrased, it is respect and understanding for individuals of different backgrounds and affirming their worth. Even though they have differences, they are still just as worthy of dignity and respect as anybody else, as someone who is exactly like me to someone who is the complete opposite of me. Cultural competence is seeking to understand what makes them different and celebrating that as well. I think that cultural competence is best completed, although it's not fully complete ever, but it's best experienced when we are celebrating people of other cultures and not just understanding them, but really enjoying what their culture brings to the table and the experience and the insight that they have because of how they view the world and because of the lens at which they come at things. And as I said in this last paragraph, it is a lifelong journey. So it's not, there's no finish line with cultural competence. You are always learning, always striving to become more and more competent because the world is ever changing. And so we have to continue to do the work. A quote that I really enjoyed from a lecture by Dr. Chappell and Dr. Harris Jackson was that we should ask to understand and not to be a voyeur. And I think that this is a huge part of cultural competence, is asking people about their culture or about, what it is, that identifying factor that is different between the two of us, and asking from a place of wanting to understand and wanting to have empathy and not asking to pry or to gain insight for personal gains or to use that against them in some way. I think that this was a great reminder that when we are asking questions of someone about their experience as a person of color, as a queer person, as a non-able-bodied person, how do we ask those questions in a way that comes from respect and understanding and not in a way to then turn that against them. And there are several takeaways from this class for my social work practice moving forward. First, from the very first module of this course, we talked about the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. And this is something that in every assignment, in every lecture has been touched on or alluded to in some way. And on the screen, I have the 7 pillars of the Code of Ethics, and highlighted or bolded are some of them that truly relate to working with diverse populations. Of course, all of these do, but specifically, I wanted to touch on these 3. So social justice has always had roots in working with diverse people. And I think it's so important that as social workers moving forward, we as students and social workers, clinicians in the future are always keeping social justice movements in mind and being part of them at a local level, state level, national, global level. That, in a sense, is advocating for our clients, not just for them as individuals, but for clients as a whole, for a group as a whole. And then the dignity and worth of a person, always keeping that in mind. Again, going back to the slide about me, I am a human. I deserve dignity and worth, and so does every other person on this planet. And so keeping that in mind when working with diverse populations, despite whatever difference there may be, it boils down to us all being human and being worthy of dignity and respect. And then the last one, competence. We talked about cultural competence already. So just continuing that, continued education, always working to understand more and learn more is the best way to advocate for our clients as things change. And then I boiled some things down to some just simple takeaways that I am going to be thinking about as I work with my clients in the future. Empathy first. Advocate always, check biases, continue learning. And we did talk about some of these already, but I just wanted to go back to check biases. That was something in this course that I very much enjoyed, taking the quizzes to assess my biases, my unconscious biases. And I think that is something as part of cultural competence that I should continue to do, and social workers should continue to do periodically. Understanding our biases allows us to get to the root of why we have those biases, why do we think those things, and then combat them with facts and knowledge about, the person or people groups we might have that bias against. And so I think that is something that in my social work practice, I will make a habit of periodically checking my biases. Where do I stand when it comes to working with a certain group, and why do I feel that way about them? How can I take that feeling and turn it into something that would not work against my clients at all. And I also liked another quote from a lecture by Dr. Chappell in Module 2. This is from the lecture on microaggressions. She said, social workers are obligated to understand experiential reality. And to me, that means that we are obligated to listen to a client's experiences and believe them. So if a client says that they experienced racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, transphobia, anything like that, we are obligated to believe what they say and to understand what that made them feel, and also understand what systems are in place that allows those isms, those phobias to exist in society. And so I thought that that was a really great quote that boiled down my obligation as a social worker when working with diverse population groups. And here are my list of references. Obviously took some references from the lectures in this course, our course textbook, and some additional research on the Me Too movement, as well as graphics from the National Association of Social Workers website and the Me Too movement Instagram page. Thank you very much.